The Anna Calder Case. Chapter 1. The Discovery. 26 April 2025, 6:20 a.m., Mandurah, Western Australia. In his 21 years of working at Mandurah Country Club, Wayne Hopper had grown accustomed to noticing anything that looked out of place. A broken sprinkler, a fallen branch, kangaroo tracks in freshly mown grass. That morning, it was the kangaroos themselves that were out of place. 5 or 6 of them stood near the first hole. Instead of scattering at the sound of the mower, they remained perfectly still, staring ahead, as though their attention had been captured by something Wayne could not yet see. He instinctively slowed down. A few meters ahead, a woman lay on the ground, face up. As he approached, he immediately recognized Anna Calder, the wife of one of the club directors and a regular who was known by almost everyone there. Wayne took a few more steps and stopped. The woman lay motionless. At first glance, there was no blood, no visible injury. Everything looked so ordinary that his mind refused to accept what he was seeing. "Anna," he called softly. There was no answer. He moved closer cautiously. "Anna, can you hear me?" Silence. Wayne dropped to one knee beside her. He hesitated for a few seconds, then gently touched the side of her neck with his fingers, searching for a pulse. Nothing. He held his palm near her lips, holding his breath, hoping to feel even the faintest warmth of an exhaled breath. Nothing. Her skin was cold. He slowly got to his feet, backed away several steps, and took out his phone. His fingers were shaking so badly that he missed the number he needed on his first attempt. The second time, the call went through.
"Emergency services. What has happened?"
"I need the police and an ambulance. I'm at Mandurah Country Club. I found a woman. She's lying near the first hole."
"Is she conscious?"
"No."
"Have you checked whether she's breathing?"
"I have. She isn't breathing."
"Have you checked for a pulse?"
"I have. I couldn't find one."
"Are you sure you're not in any immediate danger? Is there any danger nearby traffic fire? Anything else?"
"No, there's no one here."
"Okay, police and an ambulance are already on their way. Please don't touch anything around you. Stay nearby, and if you notice any change in her condition, tell me immediately."
Wayne looked at Anna again. There would be no change. He understood that more clearly with every passing second. "I'll stay here." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and remained standing where he was. He did not approach Anna again. Mist slowly drifted across the course, concealing the distant fairways and trees. An ordinary Saturday morning. In an hour, the car park would begin filling with vehicles, followed by the first players. Some would hurry in for an early round. Others would stop by the clubhouse for coffee before their game. Right now, all of it seemed distant and unreal. Wayne looked up. At last, the kangaroos began to move. The largest male turned first. The others followed. With several long leaps, they reached the eucalyptus trees and disappeared, one after another, into the mist. The course was empty. A few more minutes passed. Somewhere beyond the trees, a siren could be heard. At first, faint and barely distinguishable. Then it grew closer. Red and blue flashes emerged from the thick mist, and a few seconds later, a police car turned onto the access road leading to the club. An ambulance followed close behind. The patrol car door swung open. A tall police officer strode towards Wayne, carefully scanning the first hole as he came.
"Good morning. Are you the one who called emergency services?"
"Yes." The officer introduced himself, shook Wayne's hand briefly, and turned his gaze towards the woman.
"Do you know her?"
"Yes, that's Anna Calder. She's the wife of one of the club directors. She plays here almost every day. I know practically all the regulars."
"Did she often come in this early?"
Wayne shook his head. "Never. At least not that I remember. She usually went out onto the course in the evening after work. So when I saw her car in the car park, I was a little surprised." Chapter 2. The Dossier. Anna Mary Calder, née Voss. 47 years old. A primary school teacher at a public school in Mandurah. Married to Marcus Calder for 23 years. One daughter, Chloe, 17. On the evening of April 25th, the club held its traditional banquet to commemorate Anzac Day. Like most club members, Anna attended with her family. Marcus, one of the club directors, had traveled from Perth specifically for the evening. After giving his speech, he left almost immediately and drove back to Perth. He spent the entire working week there, where his company's office was located. Since Anzac Day fell on a Friday that year, 2 of his business meetings had been rescheduled for Saturday morning. Chloe left the banquet a little later and stayed the night at her boyfriend's house. Anna, meanwhile, decided to go out onto the golf course for a little while longer. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. Security cameras captured her leaving the clubhouse and heading towards the first hole. Anna never returned. Her car remained in the car park until morning, when the greenkeeper discovered her body. The initial version of events seemed entirely plausible. There were no wounds on the body, no signs of a struggle, and no injuries that might have indicated a violent death. Toxicology revealed only a moderate level of alcohol in her system, roughly consistent with the amount she had consumed at the banquet. No drugs or powerful medications were detected. The pathologist's conclusion came as a surprise. The cause of death was determined to be acute heart failure. For a 47-year-old woman with no diagnosed heart condition, such an outcome was considered highly unusual, although the specialists could not rule it out completely, particularly given the alcohol and the cold April night. At that point, the investigation was effectively over before it had even begun. The police saw no grounds to consider Anna Calder's death violent. The case was closed, and the official documents listed the cause of death as natural. Chapter 3. The Farewell Ceremony. Saturday, 17th of May, 10 a.m. From early morning, a low gray sky hung over the Greenfields area. A light rain would ease off, then begin to drizzle again, covering the windshields of cars as they turned one after another towards Bowra and Odia funeral directors on Old Pinjarra Road. The spacious hall, which could accommodate nearly 200 people, was almost completely full that day. The open coffin was surrounded by white roses. Anna lay inside wearing a dark blue dress. Her hair had been carefully styled, as though that morning she had been getting ready, as usual, to go to work at the school. After a few introductory words, the funeral director invited anyone who wished to say a few words in Anna's memory to come to the microphone. Her husband, Marcus Calder, was the first to stand. He spoke quietly, often falling silent, as though each sentence was harder to get out than the one before. He remembered the 23 years they had spent together, thanked everyone who had come to say goodbye to Anna, and several times paused for a long moment, searching for the right words. While Marcus spoke about the years he had shared with Anna, her father, Michael Voss, sitting in the front row, once again absently adjusted his tie. As soon as his hand dropped, his fingers returned to the collar, as though it had suddenly begun to choke him. When Marcus returned to his seat, silence settled over the chapel for several seconds. Outside the windows, the rain whispered softly, while heavy drops tapped steadily against the glass canopy above the entrance. Their daughter, Chloe, approached the microphone next. She was wearing a black dress, and a small black hat held a thin veil in place, concealing a face swollen from nights of tearful sleeplessness. For several seconds, she stared silently at the sheet of paper with the speech she had prepared. Then she raised her eyes and managed to say only a few words. Her voice trembled. She fell silent, tried to begin again, but no words came. Steve, Chloe's boyfriend, immediately rose from his seat. Without saying a word, he walked over to her, gently took her hand, and led her back to the pew. Chloe remained there for the rest of the ceremony, clutching the crumpled sheet of paper with her speech. Silence fell again. Somewhere beyond the windows, the rain continued to drizzle. Then Michael Voss approached the microphone. At 75, he was a short but wiry, solidly built man, the result of decades of hard work in the fishing industry. He wore an old-fashioned black suit made of heavy fabric, impeccably fitted but cut in an unmistakably 80s style, a narrow dark tie and shoes polished to a shine. His gray hair was neatly combed back, revealing a weather-beaten face deeply lined with wrinkles, while his faded blue eyes were fixed in that heavy, dry expression found only in people who have lost everything. His large, calloused fingers gripped the edges of the wooden lectern tightly. He spoke about his daughter as people usually do at such ceremonies. He remembered her childhood, told how early she had learned to read, how she had always found time to help others, no matter how many of her own troubles she had to deal with. At one point, Michael Voss remembered his wife, Joan, who had died 5 years earlier during the COVID pandemic. At the time, he and Anna had carried out her final wish together and scattered her ashes over the Indian Ocean. He fell silent for a moment, then quietly added that on that day Anna had confessed that when her own time came, she would want the same thing done with her. When the ceremony ended, many of the mourners went to the Pen, a restaurant on the shore of the estuary. At the table, they continued to remember Anna. People spoke more freely now, less restrained than they had been in the chapel. Some smiled as they shared old stories. Others listened in silence. Only Chloe was missing from the gathering. She had gone straight home after the ceremony. Michael Voss sat slightly apart from the others. A nearly full glass of whiskey stood in front of him. He slowly turned it between his palms, but in all that time, he never took a single sip. A few minutes later, he got up, went out onto the terrace and, stopping beneath the awning, lit a cigarette. A door creaked softly behind him.
Michael, please accept my condolences.
He turned around. An unfamiliar woman of about 45 stood before him.
We haven't met. My name is Karen Matthews. Anna and I had been friends since our university days in Perth.
She fell silent for a moment as though gathering her thoughts.
I need to talk to you about your daughter's death. But not here. And not now, with so many people around.
Chapter 4. The Conversation. An hour later, Karen Matthews was sitting on the patio at Michael Voss's house in Koodanup, a quiet, long-established neighborhood on the shores of the Serpentine Estuary where Michael had lived for most of his life. The garden was filled with white roses, the same kind that had adorned Anna's coffin that morning. The rain had not stopped for a minute. Large drops knocked the petals to the ground, and from a distance, it looked as though the roses were weeping. 2 glasses of whiskey stood on the table. Karen lit a cigarette and began to tell her story. She and Anna had never been the kind of friends who called each other every day. Each had a life of her own, and Karen lived in Perth, so they had probably not seen each other in person for about 5 years. But several times a year they called to wish each other a happy birthday or Merry Christmas, asked how the children were growing up, how work was going. However, in January, their infrequent conversations unexpectedly became regular. It all began with a chance encounter. In January, at the beginning of the school year, a new student joined Karen's class, a 5-year-old boy named Olivia Calder. His parents brought him to school. Marcus Calder and a young woman named Valentina Rojas, who was in the final weeks of pregnancy. Karen congratulated the couple on the baby they were expecting. Valentina smiled broadly, thanked her, touched her belly with a familiar gesture, and proudly showed off a large diamond on her ring finger. According to her, the wedding was due to take place very soon. Karen had not seen Marcus in many years, and at first was not sure that the man standing before her was really him. But the encounter stayed with her. That very evening, she called Anna and told her everything she had seen. Anna was shocked, but not so shocked that she could not believe what she was hearing. She said that she and her husband had long since become strangers to each other and thanked Karen for the information. Karen was still not certain that the man she had met was indeed Marcus Calder. She asked Anna to send her a photograph of her husband, and yes, it was definitely him. A couple of days after that conversation, Anna called Karen herself and suggested they meet in Perth. By then, she had already visited their apartment in South Perth, and the place looked uninhabited. The concierge handed her the mail that had accumulated over the previous month. After talking to him, Anna learned that a trusted associate of Marcus came to collect the mail about once a month. According to the concierge, he had not seen Marcus himself for a couple of years. Anna had no intention of making a scene. If Marcus had been living a double life for so many years, there was little point in confronting him about it now. Far more important was to protect herself and Chloe in advance. She decided to consult a family lawyer to find out what she and her daughter could expect when it came to the divorce. After that meeting, they spoke on the phone several more times. Their last conversation took place about 2 weeks before Anna's death. By then, she had already consulted a family lawyer who had brought a forensic accountant onto the case. Together, they had drawn up a rough picture of the assets that would have to be divided in a divorce. Based on publicly available information, the figure came to around $7 million. But Anna did not believe that number. She knew Marcus too well, and was certain that his wealth was considerably greater. The bulk of his assets was simply hidden beyond the reach of ordinary checks. She said she intended to dig deeper, but there was another discovery that truly alarmed Anna. It turned out that both her life and Chloe's had been insured for very substantial amounts. At the end of the conversation, Anna mentioned that she was considering hiring a private investigator. Whether she actually did so, Karen never found out. They never had a chance to speak about it again. So when Karen received an invitation to the farewell ceremony, she was devastated. She did not believe her friend had died of natural causes. As Karen spoke, Michael's face kept twitching, and he repeatedly clenched his fists. When she finished, he said,
"That bastard will pay for everything."
Chapter 5. The Debt. Sunday, 18th May. At around 10 in the morning, Michael called Chloe. She did not answer immediately. From her sleepy, hoarse voice, it was clear that he had woken her. Neither of them had yet recovered from the day before, but Michael did not want to put the conversation off. There was something he needed to check. He asked Chloe if she knew where Anna's phone was. It turned out she still had it. After her mother's death, the funeral director had asked for a list of people who needed to be sent invitations, and Chloe had used the contacts saved on the phone to find the details of Anna's friends and colleagues. Michael asked her to come over and bring the phone with her. Chloe arrived soon afterwards. They sat together for a while, sharing their grief. Michael went through all the calls and notes on the phone dating back to January. He now had the name of the law firm Anna had consulted, as well as the private investigation agency. It was Sunday. Michael could not begin an investigation of his own, but he had no intention of waiting until Monday either. So he called his old friend Trevor Doyle, a former police officer he had been friends with all his life and still went fishing with. He asked him to meet and talk. Trevor was 75, a sturdy gray-haired man with more than 30 years of service in the Western Australia police force behind him, the last several as a detective sergeant before retiring. He had also been at the farewell ceremony the day before. He had known Anna since she was a child, just as he knew everyone in this town, and he understood perfectly well what state his friend was in. So when he heard Michael's voice on the phone, he did not ask any questions. He simply said,
I'll be there in half an hour.
They met at Koodanup Foreshore, a waterfront park just a short walk from Michael's house, where the Serpentine River flows into the Peel Harvey estuary. Everything here was designed for people like them. Wooden jetties extending into the murky greenish water, picnic shelters with tables set into the ground, and free electric barbecues along the path. Michael brought a couple of crab nets, some bait, and a packet of sausages from home. While Trevor lit the barbecue, he unwound the ropes and cast the nets one after another from the edge of the jetty, a familiar movement, without even thinking about it, as though he had done it 1,000 times, which in fact he had. The sausages began to hiss on the grill. The water around the jetty gently rocked the boats moored nearby. A pair of black swans shuffled past, wings brushing the ground, paying no attention to the people. Michael took 2 cans of beer out of the esky, handed one to Trevor, and opened the other for himself. He sat down at the table opposite his friend.
"I need your help, Trevor."
He briefly told Trevor everything Karen had told him the day before. Trevor listened in silence without interrupting. When Michael finished, he sat for a while, staring out at the water, then shook his head.
We can't leave this alone, Michael. If even half of what you've told me is confirmed, this wasn't a heart attack. This is a case for the homicide squad.
"I always knew he was trouble."
Michael said.
"No one should have had anything to do with that family. Joan and I were against the marriage, but she was so happy, so in love with him, that we didn't want to stand in her way."
He fell silent.
"You know, Trevor, my mother suffered at the hands of that family too back in the day. Anna never knew about it, and hardly anyone else does either. And even if she had known, I doubt it would have stopped her back then, when she was young. So Joan and I decided not to dig up the past, not to upset her. It was a long time ago, a generation ago. You remember, Trevor, my mother was never in the best of health. Before Mandurah, we lived in Pinjarra. She worked as a hired hand on one of the farms, but she couldn't handle the heavy work. So we moved here in 1960. I was 10 at the time. By then, she had already been a widow for 7 years. My father was killed in 1953 during the Korean War. She received a widow's pension, but there was never enough money. Here she opened a small sewing workshop, altering clothes, and saved every shilling for my education. She wanted me to make something of myself. In 1963, Mandurah Country Club was completing construction of its clubhouse. The building work cost £20,000, and they were always short of money. The founding treasurer was William Calder, Marcus's grandfather. They were already a wealthy family by then, with their fingers in law and finance. My mother made him shirts to order. That's how they met, and it was the beginning of her misfortune. At first, Calder offered to sell her debentures, the membership contributions to the club as they were called back then, £10 for a man, 5 for a woman. My mother just laughed. With her health, golf was the last thing she could think about, let alone becoming a member. All she wanted was to give me a chance in life. Then this benefactor, at least that's clearly how he saw himself, pretended to understand her situation. A widow, on her own, struggling, I understand, Mrs. Voss. And he offered her as a favor the chance to invest in shares in a company that was developing the site, something like Mandurah Golf Development Company. It was a pure investment, an asset that would increase in value over time. My mother believed in his kindness and handed over the last of her money, hoping it would help make her dream come true. But when the time came for her to receive her share, it turned out she had nothing to show for it. My mother had trusted Calder. She had little education, knew nothing about finance, receipts, or contracts, and he took advantage of that. Everything he had promised her was nothing but words. No paperwork, no contract, no witnesses, and she certainly had no money for a lawyer to challenge him. So she carried the whole burden alone for half her life, until I went into the fishing industry at 16. That made things a little easier for her.
Trevor took a sip of his beer.
So it runs in the family, and Marcus's old man is still alive and kicking. I never liked him either. Always thought he was a big shot. Always treated people like cattle.
Marcus Calder will answer to me for my daughter.
Michael said grimly.
And for my mother too, while we're at it. But that's not the only thing Karen frightened me with. I can't sleep now. I keep thinking about Chloe. That family will stop at nothing if they want something. And if the law doesn't put that bastard in his place, I will. I'll put an end to it myself, with my own hands if I have to. I've got nothing left to lose, Trevor. I've had my life, but I won't let them have my granddaughter.
Don't lose your head. Don't lose your head, Michael. We need to act quickly, but not rashly. We don't even know whether Anna has already been cremated. I'll call my son now. We'll go to the station. You'll make a statement saying you have grounds to suspect a violent death. The police will contact the funeral home and place a hold on the cremation, if it's not too late.
And what if it is?
Michael asked.
Then the coroner will have preserved samples of her blood.
Chapter 6. The Postponement. Sunday, 18 May, 3 p.m. Mandurah Police Station, 333 Pinjara Road. Jacob Doyle, the local detective and son of Trevor Doyle, was already waiting for them at the station. After listening carefully to the distressed Michael, he immediately understood the seriousness of the situation and picked up the phone, calling Bowra and Odia funeral directors. Fortunately, it was not yet Anna's turn. Her body was being held in the mortuary's refrigerated chamber, and the procedure could still be stopped. Jacob ordered an immediate suspension of the cremation until further instructions. The detective then formally recorded Michael's statement. Michael gave a detailed account of everything he knew from Karen Matthews, the troubled state of affairs within the Calder family, and the fact that Anna had hired a lawyer and a private investigator shortly before her death. Since this involved a possible violent crime, the local station was not authorized to investigate the case on its own. Jacob forwarded the material he had gathered to the Perth Major Crime Squad, marking it as critically urgent. The cremation had been suspended on his orders, but the funeral home could not hold the body indefinitely. 7 p.m. The silence in the house was broken by a telephone ringing. Michael picked up. On the other end was Marcus's familiar, calm, self-assured voice.
Good evening, Michael.
Yes.
Michael replied flatly, holding back his rising irritation.
Listen, I have to go back to Perth now, but you know we need to collect Anna's ashes tomorrow. And unfortunately, I won't be able to be there. Things are difficult at work. It's hard for me to leave Chloe alone at a time like this. Of course, she's not alone. Steve is with her, but you understand, they're still kids. I'm really counting on you, Michael.
Yes, of course.
Michael replied through clenched teeth.
I'll look after her.
Thank you. I'll try to come to Mandurah as often as I can. Call me anytime if you need anything. I'm always available.
Michael hung up. Chapter 7. The Investigation. Monday, 19th May, Perth. The morning at Western Australia, police headquarters on Adelaide Terrace began as usual, with the hum of the coffee machine and the grey Perth dawn outside the window. Detective Sergeant Olivia Marsh entered her office at exactly 8. At 35 years of age, with 7 years in the homicide division of the Perth Major Crime Squad, she had grown accustomed to Mondays rarely bringing good news. For the past 3 years, Olivia had handled particularly complex cases. Before that, she had spent years digging through the coroner's archives, specializing in cases that at first glance looked like straightforward natural deaths, but on closer examination required exhumation. A file bearing a bright red urgent sticker was waiting on the edge of her desk. The report had come through internal channels from Mandurah the previous evening. A 47-year-old woman. 3 weeks earlier, the case had been closed, the death attributed to an ordinary heart attack. Now a local detective had demanded an emergency suspension of the cremation after new circumstances had come to light. The woman's death had struck him as suspicious. The body was still at the Bora and Odea funeral home. After reading the report twice, Olivia reached for the intercom. A couple of calls to the coroner's office, and the official request for transportation was put into action. Anna Calder was to be collected immediately from the funeral home by a government-contracted transport service and taken to the Path West laboratories for a second, far more detailed autopsy. 10:30 a.m., Mandurah Police Station, 333 Pinjarra Road. As she stepped through the doors of the local police station, Detective Sergeant Marsh met Jacob Doyle to map out the next steps on the ground. The local detective was given a clear instruction. Gather every piece of information about the banquet held on April 25th, the club's annual Anzac Day celebration that had been Anna's last. They needed to reconstruct the event down to the smallest detail, from its organization and guest list to the sequence of events throughout that evening. By midday, Olivia's official vehicle pulled up outside Michael Voss's house in Koodanup. The owner was waiting on the patio, surrounded by a rain-soaked garden. His visitor briefly explained that the investigation had officially been transferred to the Perth Major Crime Squad and that she was now in charge of the case. First, Olivia asked Michael to reconstruct the entire sequence of events, and he began with the banquet on April 25th, the last time he had seen his daughter alive. Michael told the detective that he had been at the celebration too. He had been a member of the club all his life, and Anzac Day had traditionally been celebrated in grand style there. At least 300 guests had gathered that evening, including a New Zealand delegation. The noise had been so loud that it was impossible to make out a conversation, even from 2 steps away. He himself had not been sitting with Anna, but with his own group, the club elders and his close friends from New Zealand. Over the entire evening, he had exchanged no more than a couple of words with his daughter in passing, bumping into her in the crowd. Only after that detailed conversation had ended did the detective ask for Chloe to be brought in so that she could speak with her privately. Chloe arrived about half an hour later with Steve. She looked pale, her eyes swollen from crying, and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. At noon that day, they were supposed to collect her mother's ashes. Instead, the world around her had fallen apart. Michael left them on the patio and quietly went inside, giving them some privacy. Seeing the frightened, grief-stricken young woman before her, Olivia did not press her from the outset. She had to tread carefully. Gently but honestly, she explained why the cremation had been stopped as an emergency measure and why the police had to ask these questions now, while there was still time. Steve stood beside Chloe throughout, supporting her. Once she had regained some composure, Chloe began to speak. She explained that she and Steve had arrived at the club at around 6:30 in the evening. A traditional friendly mixed match between the Australian and New Zealand teams had been taking place on the course all day, so at first the guests gathered and socialized in the bar. At around 7, everyone was invited into the banquet hall. The spacious hall contained around 20 or 30 tables, each seating exactly 10 people. Chloe, her mother Anna, her father Marcus, and Steve were seated at the same table. Olivia asked her to name the other guests seated nearby. Her father, as one of the club directors, gave the official speech, and immediately afterwards, at around 7:30, he left for Perth, as he had urgent business scheduled for the following morning. Chloe and Steve did not stay long either. They left the banquet at around 8 before the main courses were served, as they had plans to meet some friends of their own. Olivia asked for the address where they had spent the night. At the time they left, her mother was still sitting at the table. Anna had seemed completely normal, laughing, joining in the conversation, and occasionally stepping out onto the balcony to talk to old friends. Chloe never saw her mother again after that. She spent the rest of the night at Steve's house with his parents, who could confirm this. The girl was far less certain when it came to her parents' relationship. As far as she knew, everything had seemed normal. But over the previous month or two, her mother had occasionally become lost in thought, as though some hidden worry were eating away at her. Whenever Chloe asked her directly what was wrong, Anna brushed it off, blaming ordinary exhaustion at school. When Chloe fell silent, Olivia turned her attention to the young man. Stephen Mackenzie, 20 years old, tall and athletic, with a short, fashionable haircut, sharp features, a neat nose, and cool, penetrating gray-green eyes. His tanned skin spoke of hours spent on beaches and yachts, while his confident, slightly languid posture suggested someone born into wealth and influence, with powerful parents behind him. His family owned one of the largest property development agencies in the Peel region, so the young man had never known want of any kind. He traveled along the coast in a bright red Porsche 911 Carrera, now parked at the gates of the house. He was studying finance and property development at the University of Western Australia in Perth, balancing his studies with the constant parties of the local affluent crowd. Steve merely confirmed Chloe's account, adding only that they had taken part in the mixed match for the Australian team during the day. Other than that, he had nothing to add. Chapter 8. Beneath the Surface. Tuesday, 20 May, 10 a.m. Perth Major Crime Squad. Anna Calder entered Olivia Marsh's office. 50 years old, tall and lean, with the athletic physique maintained by a personal trainer and a strict diet. His dark blonde hair, touched with distinguished gray at the temples, was neatly styled. His tanned, clean-shaven face, straight nose, and high cheekbones were complemented by light brown eyes. They were calm and attentive, as though their owner were accustomed to assessing people within seconds. An expensive, impeccably tailored suit, understated Swiss watch, and confident manner marked him as a man long accustomed to high status. Olivia explained the reason for the meeting. In light of new circumstances, the investigation into his wife's death was being reopened. Her body had been sent for a second examination. Marcus immediately tried to take control of the conversation. He bombarded her with questions. What exactly had they found? Why had the investigation been reopened? Who had made the decision? The only response he received was that the details were not being disclosed at this stage. Olivia immediately cut off any attempt to steer the conversation elsewhere. She then asked where he had been on the night of April 25, 26, and where he normally lived. Without hesitation, Marcus replied that on weekdays, he lived in an apartment in South Perth. Olivia silently made a note in her notebook. From Michael Voss's statement, she already knew that Marcus had not actually been seen at that apartment for years. Over the previous day, Olivia had also managed to speak with Karen Matthews. She merely confirmed and added to the information Michael Voss had already provided. Conversations with Anna, the empty apartment in South Perth, the lawyer, the forensic accountant, and Anna's growing suspicions that her husband was hiding some of his assets. By the 1st of June, the investigator's desk held the responses to production orders sent to banks and insurance companies back in May. Almost nothing of any substantial value was registered in Marcus's name. According to the documents they had received, The family's real wealth was held in an old trust administered by an external company. It was not Marcus who controlled it, but his father, Richard Calder. The insurance companies confirmed substantial life insurance policies on Anna and Chloe. Marcus remained the primary beneficiary on both policies. Through the school Oliver Calder attended, the investigator was able to establish Valentina Rojas's identity and address. Oliver Calder was born in 2019. In March, Valentina had a second son, Lucas Calder. The boy was now about 3 months old. Oliver's school records listed the family address in Cottesloe, Perth's most expensive suburb, where the median house price reached as much as $3.5 million. A couple of streets back from the coast stood a 2-story white house with large windows, a meticulously maintained garden, a 2-car garage, and a children's play area in the yard. The spacious rooftop terrace offered views of the ocean. This was where Valentina lived with her children. It was also where Marcus effectively lived. Officially, the house belonged to Richard Calder. He had purchased it in his own name and stated in his will that, after his death, the property would pass to his grandson Oliver. Tuesday, 3rd of June. That morning, Pathwest's report on the second autopsy arrived at the station. The pathologist had conducted an expanded toxicological analysis of fresh blood and tissue samples. Among other substances, sildenafil was detected in Anna's blood. In men, the drug is used to treat erectile dysfunction. In women, it is officially prescribed only for a rare form of pulmonary hypertension, which Anna had never suffered from. The concentration detected was significantly higher than the therapeutic dose. Much now began to fall into place. A healthy 47-year-old woman with no diagnosed heart condition had suddenly suffered a heart attack. A high dose of sildenafil placed serious strain on the cardiovascular system, particularly when combined with alcohol. It could well have caused the acute heart failure that had been mistaken for a natural cause of death during the initial autopsy. Now they needed to determine how the drug had entered Anna's system. By then, Marsh had not only the results of the second examination, but also Jacob Doyle's report. It contained the results of interviews with Mandurah Country Club staff and the organizers of the Anzac Day banquet, along with a description of the CCTV footage. According to the report, Anna had spent the entire evening at the table with a group of female friends, drinking white wine. Marcus had approached the bar only once. The footage showed the bartender handing him a glass of spirits and a can of cola. One of the guests later recalled that Marcus had complained about his heart that evening and said he was not feeling well. Wednesday, 4th June. Marcus Calder once again stepped through the doors of the Perth Major Crime Squad. Detective Marsh informed him that the toxicology results were inconsistent with the theory of a natural death. As a result, the case had been reclassified as suspicious. The financier froze for a second, taking in what he had just heard, then asked in an even voice whether this meant Anna had been murdered. The detective replied that the investigation was ongoing and that it was too early to draw such conclusions. The conversation returned to the events of that evening at the golf club. Marsh asked him to recall how he had been feeling during the banquet and what he had been drinking. Calder answered without hesitation that his heart condition had made him feel unwell and that he had drunk nothing but water throughout the evening. Then came the crucial question. Did he have any personal or business disputes, or any enemies who might wish harm on his family? Marcus calmly shook his head. He could not imagine anything of the sort. According to him, he had neither enemies nor any serious conflicts. In business, disagreements with partners and clients could sometimes be heated, but that was simply part of corporate life. Such situations never escalated into outright threats. Marsh then asked him directly why Anna and Chloe were insured for such substantial amounts. Calder did not flinch. After a brief pause, he remarked that for a family of his means, this was perfectly ordinary, and there was nothing unusual about it. The next question came almost casually. Who are Valentina Rojas, Oliver, and Lucas Calder to you? This time, his composure faltered for only a moment. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, which he brought under control almost immediately. In a cold tone, Marcus asked where the detective was going with this, then stated that he would discuss any further questions only in the presence of his lawyer. Thursday, 5th of June. Valentina Rojas came to the Perth Major Crime Squad office in response to a summons. Petite and slender, with long dark hair, and the very fair skin characteristic of some Colombians. Large dark eyes, full lips, a natural South American beauty untouched by metropolitan polish. At 25, she looked very young, almost like a teenager. Valentina told her story calmly, as though she had long understood that this conversation would one day have to take place. At 18, she had come to Australia to study hospitality management at Curtin University. At the time, her parents had been able to afford it. She also worked part-time as a waitress at a restaurant in the city. Marcus Calder was a regular there, left generous tips, and clearly showed an interest in her. She did not take him seriously at the time. He seemed far too old for a romantic relationship. Later, her parents ran into serious financial difficulties. They could no longer afford to pay for her studies, and Valentina did not want to return to Colombia. That was when she accepted Marcus's advances. At the time, she knew nothing about his marital status. Soon afterwards, Valentina became pregnant, and she had to put her studies on hold. It was not until her son Oliver was a year old that she discovered Marcus had been living a double life all along. By then, it was too late to end the relationship, and she did not want to. He arranged a job for her at his firm. Thanks to that job, she first obtained a work visa, then permanent residency, and last year Australian citizenship as well. Throughout all those years, Marcus had spoiled her, taken her overseas, showered her with expensive gifts, and constantly promised that sooner or later everything would change. His promise to marry her remained just that, a promise. When Valentina became pregnant with their second child, her patience finally ran out. She gave him an ultimatum. Either he finally resolved the situation, or she would end it herself. She was no longer willing to live forever as the other woman. Marcus then gave her an engagement ring and assured her that she would not have to wait much longer. Now she was frightened. Valentina was afraid even to think about what had happened to Anna. Over the years, she had come to know Marcus well enough to understand that he was a hard man, accustomed to always getting his way. She was not worried about the children. Marcus had said more than once that he had always dreamed of having sons. He called Oliver and Lucas true Calders, his heirs and successors to the family line. Valentina had no doubt that he would never hurt the boys. She had no such confidence when it came to herself. She understood that women came and went in Marcus's life. It was entirely possible that there had been others besides her. Despite his heart problems, he regularly took Viagra. The tablets were always close at hand. She had been waiting for Marcus to divorce his wife, but she could never have imagined that it would all end with Anna's death. Friday, 6 June, 10 a.m. Mandurah. Detectives Olivia Marsh and Jacob Doyle were carefully reviewing the golf club's CCTV footage. On the video, everything was perfectly clear. Marcus bought a glass of alcohol, presumably whiskey, and a can of cola at the bar, then returned to the table and sat down beside Anna. He placed the drinks in front of him but never touched them. Sometime later, he got up to give his speech, then said goodbye to everyone and left. At one point, Anna picked up the very same can of cola her husband had brought and drank from it. Soon afterwards, Chloe and Steve also said goodbye to the guests and left the club. About half an hour passed. Anna got up from the table, picked up her handbag, and without saying goodbye to anyone, left the room. The exterior cameras captured her leaving the clubhouse and heading towards the golf course. Her silhouette quickly disappeared into the darkness. Before long, the guests began to leave, and the car park gradually emptied. No one saw her again that night. 12:30 p.m. Mandurah Country Club. The bar was quiet at that hour. A few patrons sat at high tables, talking in unhurried voices. The televisions were quietly showing some golf match, but no one was paying any attention to it. Daniel Moretti stood behind the bar. When he saw the familiar detective, he greeted her politely. From his expression, it was obvious that he immediately understood why they had come. Olivia Marsh introduced herself and asked if he could spare them a little time. Daniel was 19, though he looked older than his years. Thin and wiry, with tired shadows beneath his eyes, he gave the impression of someone who rarely managed to get enough sleep. Dark, almost black hair, olive skin, and the surname Moretti suggested Italian roots. His hands were rough, marked by small scars and calluses. There was wariness in his eyes. He looked at people with the caution of someone accustomed to expecting little from life. Yet he had a broad smile and beautiful teeth. They went out onto the country club's balcony, which was empty at that moment. From there, they had a breathtaking view of the immaculately maintained course. The Australian winter sun bathed the manicured lawns in soft light, while kangaroos, scattered across the endless green, basked contentedly in its warmth. Detective Marsh explained that, after reviewing the CCTV footage, she wanted to clarify a few details and asked Daniel if he remembered what Marcus Calder had ordered at the Anzac Day event. A hint of pride entered Daniel's voice. He knew the club's regulars and their orders well. He knew Marcus Calder's preferences by heart. A double Macallan, 18 years old, with plenty of ice, and always a separate can of cola. Separate. Marcus never mixed the two in the same glass. That evening had been exactly the same. The conversation then turned to the Calder family as a whole. Daniel said he knew them well, since they were regular members of the club. When he spoke about Anna, an unexpected warmth entered his voice. She was calm, friendly, easy to talk to, with a good sense of humor. There was something maternal about her, a feeling Daniel could not quite put into words. He eventually said that she was a real teacher, the kind everyone loved. From the way he spoke about her, it was clear that Daniel genuinely liked Anna. When it came to wine, she preferred South Australian Sauvignon Blanc. He knew Chloe just as well. She was sociable, cheerful, and found it easy to get along with people. Daniel usually made her a flat white. Her boyfriend Steve usually stuck to a can of cola. At the mention of Chloe and Steve, the detectives noticed a change. Daniel visibly tensed. His voice became drier, and for a moment his eyes shifted away. 2 p.m. After arranging the meeting with Michael Voss and Chloe Calder in advance, Detectives Marsh and Doyle drove to Michael's house in Koodanup. The day was surprisingly warm for an Australian winter. Sunlight flooded the well-kept garden, the white roses were in full bloom, and a light breeze barely stirred the branches of the many lemon and mandarin trees. Everything around them seemed to breathe peace and eucalyptus. Detective Marsh had several specific questions, namely Marcus Calder's state of health and whether they knew Daniel Moretti. Michael said that everyone close to Marcus knew about his congenital arrhythmia. That was why he had always taken meticulous care of himself, exercising regularly, following a strict diet, and maintaining excellent physical condition. From the outside, he looked like a fit, healthy man, but his heart had always remained his weak point. Chloe confirmed her grandfather's account. As for the bartender, she gave a nervous little laugh. She explained that Daniel had tried to court her, but had been rejected immediately. First, he simply wasn't her type. And second, well, haha, same as point one. At the surname Moretti, Michael Voss fell silent for a moment.
Moretti. Could he be Francesco Moretti's son? I knew his father. He owned a restaurant, Trattoria Moretti.
He paused for a moment, searching his memory.
He was a good man. We knew each other a little. We were both club members. Sometimes we played together. If I remember correctly, he died in 2021. His heart gave out. He was still a relatively young man.
Michael could remember nothing else about the Moretti family. Chapter 9, Moretti. From a conversation with Bianca Moretti, Daniel's mother, the detectives were able to piece together the history of the family. Francesco Moretti owned a small Italian restaurant, Trattoria Moretti, in Mandurah. In his spare time, he sometimes played golf at the local club. That was where he met Marcus Calder. In the autumn of 2019, while the clubhouse was undergoing renovations, Marcus offered him an opportunity to invest in a new business venture. Francesco took the risk and invested all of the family's savings. No documents were drawn up. Everything was based entirely on trust. The money was handed over as a personal loan, without a single receipt, written agreement, or witness. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic began. The restaurant, which had already been struggling to stay afloat, finally closed its doors. Francesco tried to file a lawsuit on his own, without a lawyer. But with no paperwork, no receipt, and no witnesses, he had no way of proving that the deal had ever existed. He lost the case, and the money he had invested remained with Marcus Calder. The loss of the business, the defeat in court, and constant stress finally took a heavy toll on Francesco's health. In 2021, he died of a heart attack. At the time, Daniel was only 15. He was finishing year 10. He never went on to year 11. After her husband's death, Bianca was left alone with 3 sons. Her own health was far from good, and the 2 younger boys were still at school, so the responsibility for the family fell on Daniel's shoulders. He took whatever work he could find. He worked on construction sites, went out to sea with fishermen, and picked up shifts in bars. Anything that brought in even a little money became work for him. Chapter 10: The Solution. Olivia and Jacob returned to the club's security footage. The wide shot of the room no longer interested them. Now their attention was focused entirely on the camera, aimed directly at the bar counter. After checking the time code against the previous recording, they immediately rewound to the moment Marcus Calder approached to place his order. At the time, Daniel was serving another customer. Marcus placed his order, and while the bartender prepared the drinks, casually chatted with the man standing beside him. Daniel poured Marcus a whiskey over ice. Then he opened the refrigerator, took out a can of Coke, and paused for a moment. His hand reached for the shelf beneath the counter, a place the camera could barely see. The next moment, a small paper packet flashed between his fingers. Daniel opened the can and discreetly emptied its contents inside. It took no more than 10 seconds. He then placed Marcus's order and the other customer's drink on the counter. Both paid without interrupting their conversation, collected their drinks, and walked into the dining area together before going their separate ways to their respective tables. Olivia pressed pause. 10 June, 8 a.m. Daniel Moretti was arrested at home, in a small rented house on the outskirts of Mandurah, where he lived with his mother and brothers. The door was opened by Bianca Moretti. When she saw Mandurah Police Detective Jacob Doyle, Perth Major Crime Squad Detective Olivia Marsh, and 2 uniformed officers standing on the doorstep, she understood immediately. She asked no questions, simply stepped aside and let them in. Daniel came out to meet them himself, still in his pajamas, looking as though he had barely slept. His eyes flicked from Jacob to Olivia and back again, but he said nothing. His rights were read to him: the right to remain silent, the right to legal representation. Daniel listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor. The handcuffs clicked shut quietly. Bianca stood in the doorway, one hand pressed over her mouth, making no sound. Daniel was led to the police vehicle and taken to Mandurah Police Station on Pinjarra Road. Closer to midday, he was transported under police escort to Perth, to the Perth Watch House. While Daniel was being taken to Perth, Olivia applied for a warrant to seize his phone. The court granted it that same day. The security footage from behind the bar provided sufficient grounds for the application. The phone contained searches made in the weeks leading up to the banquet. What could be dangerous for someone with a heart condition? Which medications could trigger a cardiac event? What dosage was considered fatal, and what dosage was considered critical? Among the search results were Viagra, Camagra, Senforce, Silagra, and Malegra, all sildenafil-based medications. There were also searches for places where they could be purchased. By evening, Daniel was formally interviewed in the presence of a court-appointed lawyer. For the first half hour, Daniel remained silent, as his lawyer had advised. To every question Olivia asked, he simply lowered his eyes and said nothing. Then something in him broke. He burst into tears right there at the table, burying his face in his hands. The words came pouring out in a single stream, and the lawyer could no longer stop him. Daniel told them everything: about his father, about the restaurant, about the scheme Marcus Calder had drawn Francesco into, about the lawsuit his father could never win without a single receipt to prove the deal, about how his father had faded after losing the business and then died, about how at 15 he had been forced to leave school and go to work to support his mother and 2 younger brothers. He said that for years he had stood behind the bar serving the man who had destroyed his family. Every time he poured his whiskey, smiled, and acted as though nothing had ever happened. Because there was no choice. Work was work. Then he started talking about Chloe. He said he had genuinely fallen in love with her. He had taken a long time to work up the courage to approach her, and when he finally did, She rejected him outright. To her, he was simply not her type. After that, everything only became more painful. Every day he watched the Calders living in luxury. Chloe arrived in an expensive convertible, her boyfriend drove a red Porsche, while after his shift he went home and counted the money to make sure there would be enough to get his family through. He admitted that he had come to hate almost all of the Calders. Marcus, who, in his eyes, was a bastard who had destroyed his family's life. The arrogant old man, Richard Calder. Their entire world, where some people were allowed everything while others had to pay for someone else's greed. That was when he decided to take revenge on the bastard. But he had never wanted Anna to die. His voice broke again. Daniel began sobbing even harder. He said Anna was the only person in that family he had ever felt any genuine warmth towards. She had never looked down on him, always greeted him, smiled and spoke to him as an equal. He had not thought about her at all when he slipped the powder into the can. Anna never drank sugary soft drinks and followed a healthy diet, so it had never occurred to him that the can of Coke would end up in her hands. He had been thinking only about Marcus. Everyone at the club knew Marcus had a weak heart. Daniel knew his habits and his usual order by heart. So he took Camagra and slipped it into the can of Coke, expecting Marcus's death to be mistaken for a heart attack. But everything went completely wrong. Chapter 11, The Final Promise. Tuesday, June 17th. It was a clear, warm day. A cloudless blue sky stretched over the Indian Ocean, sunlight shimmering across the calm surface of the water. Trevor cut the engine. The boat rocked gently on the light swell far from shore. Michael sat at the stern, holding a small urn in his hands. For a while he stared silently at the water, then removed the lid. The wind caught the first particles of ash and carried them out over the ocean. He slowly scattered the contents of the urn, watching the gray ashes dissolve in the air and disappear above the water. Trevor stood at the helm, watching his friend with a troubled look. He remembered that conversation on the jetty, remembered every word, and he knew that nothing would stop the old man now. At that moment, Michael whispered,
Rest in peace, my girl. I don't make promises I don't keep.